Right.
So we've got Brent in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Thanks for waiting.
Hey.
Hey.
I just wanted to quickly ask why it was that even though there is no evidence for a higher being.
Hello? Seems like we might have lost Brent. If we can try and get him back on, that'd be great. But I'd say
Here we go.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Okay. So even though there is no evidence for a higher being, how, like, what is it that brings you to the conclusion?
So
or if it doesn't?
So you just gave the reason. Okay. So atheism, and there's a lot of disagreement and arguing about the term. Some of it's taken place even over Facebook. I've got a debate opponent that I've done two debates with, and we'll talk to more, who tries to say that atheism only means I believe there are no gods, full stop. And I completely disagree with that. But the reason, as you point out, there's no evidence for a higher power, supreme being. That is enough to not believe. I mean, the burden of proof is on the claim that there is a God. If the burden of proof hasn't been met and you may be incapable of meeting it, then no one should be believing. The time to believe something is after it's been demonstrated to be true. So generally speaking, atheists are people who do not believe or who reject the proposition. Hopefully they reject it because there's not sufficient evidence for it. That's not everybody's reason. There are people who are, atheists for bad reasons. There are people who are atheists for other good reasons as well. But I find it strange that somebody could start off by saying, even though there's not evidence for this, why don't you believe it? I mean, that is the reason.
I agree, but your stance on so as an atheist, do you believe in anything other than, I guess, the material world? Like, do you believe that something else is held accountable for thought process?
Okay, so atheism is only about whether or not a God exists. It's entirely possible that someone could be an atheist and believe in something supernatural other than a God.
Like ghosts, for example.
Yes.
Ghosts, and there are some atheists who buy into all sorts of bullshit, woo-woo, pseudoscientific claims for bad reasons. I don't. I don't believe that, I do not believe that there's anything other than the material world, for the same reason that I don't believe in a God. There's been no demonstration that there's anything other than the material world. I can't speak for everybody or every atheist, but as I'm an atheist because I'm a skeptic, because I evaluate the evidence for the claims about gods and the claims about supernatural. They don't meet their burden of proof. There's no good reason to believe them, and so I don't. And as soon as somebody provides a way, first of all, they'd have to provide a mechanism by which we can investigate and confirm the supernatural, because science is limited in the sense that it can't investigate those things without a mechanism, without a method, and nobody's provided a method. So until that happens, I don't see how anybody can rationally accept anything supernatural. They need a method to investigate it, because otherwise it just becomes argument from ignorance fallacies of, hey, I had this experience and there's no other explanation other than it was a ghost or it was a demon or it was a god. Well, the fact that you aren't aware of a particular explanation doesn't mean that your conclusion about it is correct. So that, once again, we're back to the time to believe something is after it's been demonstrated.
And just the last point, do you believe that there's something else that we can hold accountable for our own thoughts other than the material world? Because if the material world is the only, or rather what we can observe is the only, I don't know really how to put this, the only factor or the only thing that causes thought to occur, then it's all predetermined what we think.
Okay, so
even though that it is a complex mind.
that's not necessarily true. I mean, just so you're basically advocating for, if the material world is all there is, then hard determinism is true. That's not necessarily the case, which is why there have been debates about whether hard determinism is true or soft determinism is true. There are a bunch of different views on this, but it doesn't matter ultimately. So I'm a thinking agent. My brain works and it does things. Okay? It's possible under hard determinism that everything that I've done is dictated by the physical laws of the universe, that there is no such thing as free will as people would normally describe it. That doesn't in any way change the fact that it's this particular meat sack that is responsible for those actions, that is responsible for those thoughts. Just like if I've got 20 computers on a network, if I don't know that we would say that any of those computers have any free will or have any way to escape the limitations of the material world. The one that has got the virus on it that is polluting the network, that's the one that's responsible, and you go and you fix that. There's an entirely practical method by which you can go about evaluating these things. If you appeal to something supernatural, first of all, you don't have any justification for doing so. But if you do, how does that change or fix the problem? Like, for example, if I'm not just a brain that is producing consciousness and taking action, but there's actually a soul that is steering this brain, how does that fix any of the problems that you're concerned about?
Well, where I was coming from was that our thoughts could or could not be changed, or rather manipulated by our choices, because of course there wouldn't be another way.
Sure, our experience plays into our choices. Absolutely.
People change their mind. They change their. I'm a different person now than I was 20 years ago. Aren't you?
Well, yes.
I mean, I don't know how old you are. Assuming you're over 20, I would say that you're different than you were 20 years ago. And you've changed your mind on things, right?
I have.
So,
or at least I thought I think
sure.
I have.
It does. So this idea that there's some you that isn't bound by the material world that is responsible for changing your mind, it's a neat idea, but there's no reason to think that it's true, and I don't see how it fixes anything. I don't see how it changes the fact that you're the one talking to me, whether you were predetermined to call the show today and say the things you were going to say is a completely separate issue from the impact that your words and this discussion has on each of us and everybody else who's listening.
Well, I agree.
Okay.
It's not that I don't think that it has an impact. It's just that it makes it pointless. What
do you mean pointless?
Well, if you can't choose, if it is an illusion, somehow created, then it kind of makes it pointless. I'm asking, what do you mean by pointless? Because you've agreed that even without appealing to the supernatural, minds can change. And that I don't think we explicitly hit this point, but I think you would agree that one of the ways minds change is by having conversations and debates. And by presenting different evidence and different arguments. Isn't that how minds tend to change? Yeah.
Okay. So then, even if it was all predetermined, well, first of all, if it's all predetermined, then okay, it was predetermined that you would think it's pointless, at least for now, and that doesn't change a thing. You're stuck. So if you don't have the type of free will that you'd like to have, or if you do, nothing changes. Because if you don't have it, there's nothing you can do about it, and you either accept it or you don't. And you don't have any say in that. Or if you do have it, then you're still in this position where you need to be convinced, and minds change.
Let me jump in here if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
especially in the pointless.
I think that one of the things that theists struggle with is, with God, there's a grand purpose with a capital P, a purpose, and everything has meaning, and it's all part of God's plan, and all this good stuff. And without that, you don't have a grand purpose anymore, a grand capital P, but you have small p purpose, where each individual is making decisions for themselves and how they impact the world and these sorts of things, and the legacy they leave and these sorts of things. And this is where we atheists hang our hats. It's the impact that we have on the world and the people we love and the children we have and these sorts of things. These are the things that are small p purpose, and we don't even have a need for a grand P purpose, and we don't see that there is such a thing.
And we wouldn't want it. And I think it's true that Brent wouldn't want it either. So, for example, I don't know how old you are or what your current situation is, but let's say that you were going to college. Would you rather pick your own major, or would you rather have that assigned to you by the college or the state or your parents?
Well, I would like to pick my major.
Sure. Now, when it comes time for you to
Pick a mate.
Would you rather have that dictated to you by other people, or would you rather, do it on your own?
My own.
Okay. So if that's the case, what is the appeal of having a God outside of the universe that is dictating a meaning and purpose for everybody? If it's something that we would reject and revolt against in every other circumstance, what makes it good when there's a God doing it?
Well, no, I don't believe that God. Well, that would make it pointless as well if God was doing everything for you.
Well,
See,
so you don't think that God has a plan?
well, no, you can have a plan without controlling what other people.
Does God know everything that's going to happen?
I believe
Okay.
that. Yes,
Did God create the universe?
I believe that.
Could he have created a different universe?
Well, he could have.
Okay,
And I
so then
believe
he
that-
specifically chose to create the universe in which I'm an atheist and you're not. So how did I have a choice in this? If God picked this universe from other possible universes, how did I have a choice? How is it not the case that God specifically chose the universe in which I would be an atheist?
Well, that's the whole reason for my belief, is because I believe that you are your own individual being, and
But that means that I could do things that God didn't choose. I mean, okay. Well, then he doesn't know.
I believe I've led myself. I don't know exactly what.
So see, the thing is, if there's a God who created the universe and who could have created different universes, that means he made a decision to create this specific universe knowing exactly what would happen.
Unless he's throwing dice, right?
I mean, unless he doesn't know what's going to happen, and he said, oh, I could make this universe or I could make that universe. I don't know what's going to happen in either of them, in which case, as Don pointed out, he's throwing dice. But if he chose this particular universe from other alternate universes, knowing what would happen in both of them, then he's the one who made the decisions, not us. Well, let me skip past that because it tends to be a stumbling block. When you say all this is pointless, what is the purpose of your life, and where did it come from?
Well, what I was trying to stress on was that if I am my own individual being, and I am experiencing reality.
Okay.
Because if, of course, I wasn't my own thinking being, I wouldn't know whether or not I was experiencing
That's
that
like
reality.
solipsism, right?
Wait, would you know it in the other case? I mean, you're saying if this is true, I wouldn't know. If something else was true, would you know? Or isn't that just an unknown? So
I'm afraid I'm not catching on.
You're afraid what?
I'm afraid I'm not catching on to that.
Okay. So you're saying if you weren't your own person or steering your own ship or making your own decisions, then you wouldn't know. Well, I'll drop this because it's confusing. You said that it's pointless, and I still don't know what you mean by that or why.
Well, what I mean by pointless is that there's no point in believing that we have our own decisions if there isn't something else that governs over that
Why?
decision.
So, to me, that's backwards. So, first of all, whether or not there's any point to believing we make our own decisions, I'm not sure what you mean by point or why it's important. But when you say that if we don't make our, if there wouldn't be a point to this if we didn't make our own decisions, would there be a point to it if we did?
Yes.
What would the point be?
The point is that you're choosing the path that you lead.
Okay.
And
how is that fundamentally different, and why is it valued?
well,
Because if you can't tell, can you tell the difference between whether or not you have free will or whether or not you have an illusion of free will?
no, that's the reason.
Okay, so if you can't tell the difference between it, then that would seem to imply that from your perspective, they are indistinguishable, and yet you want to say one of them has a point and one of them doesn't. I don't know what the point is. I mean, other than saying, which is what I think you're saying, it would be nice to think that my actions are not predetermined. And it might be nice to think that, but I'm only concerned about whether or not it's true. It would be nice to think I'm going to live forever. It would be nice to think I'm getting ready to win the lottery.
Well, I don't really want to know what's nice to think. I'd rather know what it is definitely.
Okay. Me too. I'd love to know what's true.
Yes, sir.
So if you admit that you can't tell the difference, you have no way to tell which of these two scenarios is true, then you can't have any good reason to believe one over the other. So your position must be, I don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
So
how can you be a theist?
well, it's because I believe that there is.
Okay. How do you tell the difference between a universe that is theistic and a universe that is not theistic?
You can't.
Okay. So if you can't
Or at
tell the
least I don't
difference,
think that you can.
if you can't tell the difference, then what justification can you have for believing that it is a theistic universe?
That you are. Well,
I'll help you out. You can't. If you're acknowledging that you can't tell the difference between two things, then you're acknowledging that you cannot then choose one of those two things and be rationally justified in doing so. You can certainly be convinced of something for bad reasons, but if you care about what's true, then you would want to be convinced for good reasons. And if the truth is that you can't tell the difference between these two possibilities, then your position is you shouldn't believe.
Right. The honest answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
Or I can't tell.
See, the atheist position is not necessarily gods are false, there are no gods. Certainly you can have that position rationally about some gods. If they are prone to internal contradictions or their definitions conflict with observations in reality, if they are logically impossible, things like that. But for an unfalsifiable proposition of God, unfalsifiable meaning there's no way to demonstrate that this is false, then you can't be rationally justified in believing it. And that's the atheist position in many cases. I do not believe this because there isn't a way for me to tell that it's true. I know that sounded like I was going to say something else in addition, but I figured it'd be better to stop there.
Well, I think a lot of folks come to their theism because they were sort of brought up in that environment, and I think it takes some exploration and understanding to even pose these questions and ask these questions and mull this all over. And it sounds like you're sort of in the process of doing that, which is admirable.
Yes, that's my effort, because the direction that I wanted to steer this in was that we create the concepts that we have depending on what we observe.
Okay.
Is that false? I don't.
So we create the concepts based on what we observe. I think that that's fair. We observe things and our brain conceptualizes them, sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure where to go from there.
Yeah, me neither. All right.
Okay. Well, hey, do some more thinking about it. If you have other questions, by all means, feel free to call back. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Brent.